Hello and welcome to Mr. Clark After Dark, everyone. My name is Lucas Clark and I am a certified educator with Alberta Education and the Alberta Teachers Association. All conversations and interactions exchanged is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. In no way does the content discussed intend to be in violation of the ATA Code of Conduct or meant to target any individual student, teacher, or to belittle or demean the profession in any way. If you have something that you would like me to discuss or have a story of your own to share, please reach out at lucasrdclark97@gmail.com. You can also send a direct message to me on Instagram at Mr. Clark After Dark. Hope you enjoy the show, and please do not forget to subscribe. And now, on to the show. Hope you all enjoy. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Mr. Clark After Dark. Today, my friends, I have on Sheldon Dahl. He is a social studies teacher who is currently in his 20th year in the profession. On this episode, Dahl and I discuss mentoring young teachers, professional learning, the idea that you have of teaching from before versus after you start, the strangeness of teacher resource competition, the 4 types of students you will encounter, the value of the high school diploma or lack thereof, handling teacher busyness, teaching the quote-unquote dog's breakfast of courses in your first year, the weight of toxic negativity, politics in teaching, how the public is losing trust in teachers, why religion is not taught as a core, teaching students how to think versus what to think, and much more. Thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate it. I hope to all see you all next time.
We'll have you teach like grade 4, 5, and 6 social studies classes. We'll have someone else, because there was a science teacher, a math teacher, and a social studies teacher all teach in grade 4, 5, and 6.
Okay.
And so the principal, like Jeff Porter, great guy,
Yeah.
he set it up so that like one of us would do all the science classes, one of us would do all the math classes, and one of us would do all the social studies classes.
Yeah.
But we would all have our own language arts class. We would all have to do the French. We'd all have to do like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I didn't have to do like the math or science for elementary, which was really nice to just do language arts and social
So you did like a
studies.
junior high split, like essentially like we do
Kinda,
now.
yeah.
So how many years did you teach high school before?
Oh, I'd have to count it up because it was also like grade 9 to 12 for that entire time.
Yeah.
If you remember.
Yes. Yeah, because it went from grade 9 to 12, then 7 to 9, 10 to 12. Because my first year at McTavish was the first year it was 7 to 9.
Yeah.
And I was here for grade 9. But
yeah. So it was 9 to 12, a composite for forever until all the schools went 7 to 12.
Yeah.
And it was that year that we were surplused.
Okay.
Which was weird because there wasn't really a surplus.
Yeah.
We were getting 2 more grades. It's like,
okay.
How does that math work, sir?
Yeah. Yeah. So I am rolling now.
Okay.
So welcome, Sheldon. I don't mean to get in like a formal intro here, but so you're going into, you taught, how many years have you been teaching so far?
This is year 20.
So is he 20? Yeah, okay. So a pretty milestone to you see. What are some things that you've seen in your day?
Oh man.
So one of the main questions I have is like, obviously I'm still pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only in year 2, I guess, like sub for 2 years on top of that, but you're still not really, you're seeing some things, but you're not really getting in on the inside of kind of how things work. But my thing is, I've kind of seen myself go from year 1 to year 2.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to see like the beginning of what reflecting and changing your kind of teaching repertoire looks like on a smaller scale. But I'm like, what did kind of year 2 versus year 5 versus year 10 kind of like look like as a change for you as you went through?
Well, for myself, and also like I've kind of been mentoring younger teachers throughout my career a bit as well, both formally and informally.
Yeah. So what do you mean by formal and informal mentoring?
Well, they had a formal mentor program for a while in the district. And so like I would get like release time to go work with teachers at Westwood, for example.
Which would be awesome.
It was cool because like you have your people in your department, but you know, you could kind of get a second opinion, get a different viewpoint. And we used to have more district collaboration days and it was subject based. So
Okay.
I worked with a lot of the social studies teachers in the district on a lot of different things. And we
So-
got along really well and shared a lot
Yeah.
of resources.
Yeah.
And
Well, because I find that that's kind of what's coming back now a little bit. Would you agree? It's kind of like the PLF has a bit like we have a social studies group now. So,
Yeah,
so how would it have been different? Like what kind of,
well, there was
why did it go away? I guess
there was
is
a
my-
period of a few years where they're like, you cannot do subject area PLFs. And the rationale for that never made sense to me. But there was a rationale said. I couldn't repeat it accurately because it just never made sense.
Is it around like you should, like teaching shouldn't be subject specific? Is that kind of what it's kind of you talking to teachers, not subject based kind of thing? I can kind of see both, but especially as a newer teacher, like I'm trying to still learn. Everyone, I mean, for as long as you teach, you're still kind of learning your subject. But like,
well, and that was the great thing about this district PLFs is you have a new teacher come in, and then all the old veterans, whether they're at McTavish or Westwood or Composite, would be all sharing resources with these new teachers. But I think there was a fear that time was not being used effectively,
that's still the case. I think it's still, but how could that ever not be the case? Like I feel like that's going to happen with anyone.
Anytime you're decentralized, that if you give decentralized planning and decision making, that it's not going to be as effective, and it may not. What you get when you give up kind of that central control is you risk that like the lowest achievers are going to do less than you want. But what also happens by giving decentralized decision making is your high flyers do better. If you have all the decisions made in the center, you're going to get a nice beige outcome. So you're still essentially like moving toward the same kind of output, but not necessarily equally distributed. Is that kind of what you're saying? But again, that's a pretty and that's just human nature.
Thing, but yes, absolutely. So if you, in your kind of like mentoring things, like what were some things that you would say to newer teachers about like what to expect, or how the like the idea of teacher versus practice of teacher?
So like kind of my journey I've seen a lot of teachers go in. Your first couple of years, you're often using the resources that were gifted to you by another teacher. And your first year, you may be, right out of the box. Right? You haven't changed a word in any of the slides, any of the handouts, any of the tests. And that's a pretty common experience.
Well, because you're kind of just trying to figure it out.
Create unit tests and PowerPoints, and you can't do all of that from scratch in 1 year. If you tried, you would burn out and you'd be out of the profession. And so veteran teachers typically will gift, paying it forward, really, because that's how I think about it. I mean, the stuff I use, I didn't get out from nowhere. It's things that I got from Larry Newman, who taught social studies for 30 years. Right. And so I've taken, I've adapted, and I've changed. But I just pay it forward, giving the stuff that I've developed on top of and modified. And it's, like the same thing. And they'll go and they'll pay it forward to some other teacher 20 years from now.
Because I've always heard, because it's brought up a lot here, of the competition of essentially the teachers would be competing. I've never understood, not that I have anything that I would have now that I could or wouldn't share, but to me it doesn't even make sense why you would be protective.
It's an artificial competition, and it comes, I think, from the district level.
So what do you mean artificial competition?
Well, so you have the Fraser report, and they compare schools, and they're like, this school is better than that school because of their diploma exam results.
So the Fraser report, was that?
So it's this right-wing think tank that looks at diploma exam results and applies various metrics, and then decides, like, it ranks schools from 1 till
like K to 12 public schools.
All the schools, like K to 12, all across the province.
I've seen this. I actually remember, I think when I went to Westwood, we were like 173rd in Alberta or something. I think that was like, okay.
Which was down from where it used to be.
Yeah.
There's some controversy. Sorry. Because Westwood used to be in the top 100, but like they slipped.
And I could be wrong with the 173rd. But...
No, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
But I know that Westwood used to be top 100, and so there was some wringing of hands when it slid a bit in the rankings. But
so like sorry, go ahead.
Comp's always been like towards the bottom, but you could almost just say, let's rank the schools by the socioeconomic class of people they draw from,
And you essentially
and you
have a
would
similar.
get pretty much the same ranking.
Yeah.
There'd be some variation. There would be discrepancies between the two, but the best predictor of how any particular student is going to do is sadly their socioeconomic background.
So that kind of brings me to, so you taught at COM for how long?
17 years.
You taught at COM for 17 years. Okay. So I find part of what I'm going to say my struggle, it's not a very good thing to say, but is how do you go about instilling the value of education in your students? Because I find from my experience, I mean, I'm only still pretty new, but I find there's just a complete disregard for what is provided in an educational institution. What do you think about that?
I tell colleagues sometimes that you've really got 4 types of students that you are going to find. And you can make a lot of progress with 3 of the 4 types. So you have students who work hard and have just, some innate school-oriented intelligence. My belief is that a lot of kids have, ability in many different areas. Yeah. But let's be honest, like the writing tests and writing essays and doing math, like these are some very specific skill sets. So some students are innately talented at those things, are good at school, right? So some students are good at school, some students work hard, and then you get a combination, right? So you've got your students who work hard and are good at school. They will do great no matter who the teacher is. It does not matter who the teacher is, they're going to get 90% plus. Then you have students who work hard, but school is not easy for them. A good teacher can help those students, right? Because they're going to do the work. And if you keep working with them, they'll get through. They'll be fine. Right? These are your kids. They could get anywhere from, 50% to 80, 90%. And it's just, sheer work ethic for them. And then you have students who don't work hard, but are good at school. This is your kid who doesn't do a lick of homework. But if you're interesting, and if you can get their attention, sometimes they'll be fine. Yeah.
And the test, it's like they'll show up the day of the test and they'll hammer out a 70, an 80.
Right. And so like the hard workers who have to work for school and the kids who don't have to work for school, but you just are good at it, right? A good teacher can get any of those kids to pass, guaranteed, any of those kids to pass. And a teacher who is not doing their best, they may lose a couple of those kids who maybe otherwise could have passed. And so that's kind of where you can like make your mark, right? Like I'm going to keep this kid engaged, or I'm going to help this kid who really struggles, but I'm going to help them. I'm going to keep working with them until they finally get the math. And then sadly, like you have a small group that's school doesn't come easy for them and they don't want to work. And traditionally, these are kids that would not be in school in high school, right? We used to, if you go back in time, these students would have dropped out and would have gone and worked. Maybe they're better at mechanics. Maybe they're better at carpentry, right? Like school just isn't their thing. It's not that they're not smart in their own way.
And that's not like an old, meaning like 80 years ago. That's literally... So when I worked at site for a summer, and essentially all the guys I worked with were probably not even 50, like maybe early 50s. And they said, left school in grade 10. It's like people were lining up for work at the shops. He's like, why would I stay in school any longer than I needed to? But now essentially you kind of need the grade
kind of
12,
in like the 80s, I would say, you start getting the shift. And so now they pretty much expect you to have a high school diploma.
For essentially anything.
And so these kids who like don't want to be here, are not good at it. What I try to do is cut them a deal saying like, look, employers want to know that you're going to stick out something that you don't enjoy. And so if nothing else,
why does school have to be like that?
It isn't for everyone though.
Yeah,
but like this is the deal you can cut with that last little segment, and hopefully, and be like, look, I know you don't like it. I know it's hard. But if you can get through it, if you can prove it and get that high school diploma, that proves to any employer that you're willing to do hard things. I would want to hire someone who's willing to do hard things.
Especially doing the things that you know you don't like, because you're essentially it's a means to an end down the road that's better, right, for everyone. But
so I mean, these aren't like, you know, your all-star students who are going to be participating in the debates and everything, but like I almost feel better about, you know, the handful of those types of kids that I got to, you know, get through than, you know, the kid who's going to get 90 anyways.
Because honestly, there's the talk that we tend to teach to the average student, but then again, it's kind of, I don't necessarily. Do you do anything to kind of tailor to some of your more affluent academic students? Because I still, even myself, I find I'm still essentially teaching toward that mid to low tier, because it's almost like I don't need to worry about you, because I know you're going to be fine. I know you're going to get the 80 and the 90. Like, my time is going to be spent on this kind of lower, quote unquote, 40%.
And you will spend most of your time with the kids in the middle. But what I try to reassure coworkers with, this is part of where the mentoring comes in, and, you know, please take this to heart, is the things we do when we're at our best are not always the same as the things we're going to do when we ourselves are treading water.
So what do you mean by that?
So if you have, you know, a test tomorrow and you're still putting together the Google form and you know, you've got printing that you need to do and so
your supervision after school.
Right. So when you have all those things piled up, you don't do the extra things where you see like, oh, this kid's done all their work and is sitting there bored. So when I've been at my best, I've done things where like, hey, I see you don't have anything to do. Here's a university paper on this topic. Read this and tell me what you think about it, right? Because that's the type of thing you can do as like an enrichment extension. And I've done those things sometimes in my career when I've been able to.
So what do you mean by being at your best versus?
So, I mean, like sometimes you have everything printed out and you have
it's a beautiful day,
right? You have all of your things up on Google Classroom. You have your lessons planned out for the day. You've caught up on all your email, right? And you are feeling good. That's another thing, right? Like we're not always mentally happy to be there. You know, like sometimes work is work, even for teachers that love their job.
Well, because I've even found myself I had this vision of what teaching was going to be like in my first year university. I'm going to be this powerful, amazing
the
speaker.
Dangerous Minds, Mr. Holland's Opus fantasy. Everyone has it,
Like, we're going to do such great things. Everyone's going to be
and a lot of people, it dies the first year. Like mine did.
So what do you mean it died the first year? Like, in what way?
Oh, my first year assignment was rough. Okay. And this happens to a lot of first year teachers. You get like the assignment no one else wanted, or what
dog's
I call
breakfast.
The dog's breakfast. Yeah, whatever is left over. And so I got my first contract because a veteran teacher looked at the assignment and said, I am not teaching this. This is garbage.
So what was your assignment?
Well, it was a class made up by students who, quotation marks, had historically not been successful in school. And so it was an ill-conceived mix of learning disabilities and behavior issues. And so the dangerous mix there is the learning disability kids would have been great on their own. And that would have been a worthwhile...
Like great on their own in another class?
Or just if they had modeled the class just to be kids with some learning disabilities.
Okay,
But throwing in the behavior kids in
just
there.
Distracting,
Right? Like it just made it either A, they became the heroes for some of these kids in a bad way, or B, they terrorized these kids, depending case by case basis, right? And so it's like, no, let's not bring the worst behaved kids in the school in with the kids who are going to struggle the most to learn.
And what were you teaching them?
I taught them math, social studies, language arts, and science. So I had these kids all day, every day, except for one block a day where I got to teach grade 9 girls gym.
Wow.
And that was my first year teaching. And I can tell you how the rest of it went, that the grade 9 girls gym class, as a non-athletic first year male teacher, was the easiest part of my assignment.
Wow. Okay, so like, what do you think what were the unexpected challenges in that first year? Like, what were you kind of thinking? Because again, I guess like you weren't necessarily teaching what you wanted to teach yet at that point. So you might still have that vision of like one day when I am teaching what I want to teach, it'll be different. So what were kind of the unexpected challenges moving into it?
I came in, I was hired the night before school started, right? So I had nothing. And so I came in the first day, I'm like, hey, I'm just going to talk about how I was living in Japan last year. Because I could have come from Japan, got this job.
Did not know that. Okay.
Yeah,
so you went to university in Japan?
No, I was teaching English there for a year.
Oh.
It was right after the strikes. There weren't a lot of jobs for new teachers.
Like 2005?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like in there, whenever that was, 2003.
Okay.
So I went to Japan for a year, taught English, came back, got the job at Comp.
Yep.
I just basically talked about Japan, talked about like what I wanted the class to do, etc. Class rules and all that. Like, we're going to make our own rules.
Yeah.
My whole goal, and again, this is your like Dangerous Minds, Mr. Holland's Opus fantasy, was to just like give a lot of positivity and just really try to help them find some success somewhere.
Yeah. Especially with those kids, because I find it's pretty cliche, but they essentially have almost no positive experiences with school. So even right now, I have a 10-2 class, but it's essentially, the goal is not, to me, especially at this point, which is maybe changed from year one, it doesn't necessarily matter to me as much of what you know about like globalization. It's, do you enjoy coming to social? Is there a way that I can essentially set this class up so that you actually come every day? Right? So you come to my class every day, and eventually you will gain that understanding. You know what I mean? I'm obviously still going through the content at the same pace, but I'm trying to kind of set up the course in a way that kind of makes it a
that's similar
positive
to how I would do it. I mean, the one thing I also like on top of, I always think of all the 10-2 or science 10 or that kind of entry is, it's also kind of remedial training for the students that you can fail if you don't do the work. Yeah. So that's the other side of it. So I would do, if I was doing 10-2, a lot of projects and things. Yeah. So anyone who tried would pass.
Yes. And that's essentially, it's like, especially at the intro high school level, that's kind of the mindset you kind of need to try to instill.
If you do the work, you pass. Yeah. Bottom line. And then kids who refuse to do the work find themselves having to take it again.
Yes.
And hopefully they learn a lesson and turn a new leaf. That's the dream. Yeah. But I had this, human version of Eeyore in my class as an EA. And oh man.
What do you mean by
just like negativity in human form. And so she had a bad hip. She was like close to retirement. And this was just like a cranky old lady. And so I'd be like, okay, we're going to learn this. And the kids wouldn't be sitting down, or they'd be chatting or something. You guys are terrible. Why can't you listen? What's wrong with you? And it was this steady stream of negativity coming from the corner of the room where she had her desk set up. Cause like, again, she wouldn't go around the room to help students because of her bad hip. So basically she just sat there like, what's their names in, the Muppets, Waldorf and the two guys that just, yip at the cast and are just negative all the time. That was basically her for the first half of the year. Yeah. She went and got hip surgery, and so was gone for a month, and it was so much better. And then she came back, and I'm like, oh man, like I thought it was better, but like, this is like night and day. Yeah. So the end of the semester, like, hey, we notice you're kind of struggling with the class. Yeah. Is there anything we can do to like make it better? I'm like, get this EA out of my room. Yeah. I'm like, what? Yeah. So she went to the next.
What was I guess, was it almost like just like a presence kind of weighing a little bit on the room?
Just the negativity was toxic. Yeah. It just this negative, toxic ingredient thrown in the mix. And I mean, I had all the same struggles any first year teacher has. And there was a lot of behavior issues. Like there was a lot.
Because you're also going through an identity struggle. Not an identity struggle, but an identity change, right? Like you're moving from, I was a student for my whole life essentially, to now I'm the one kind of in charge, right? That's a transition, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. So there were a lot of factors, but I don't know.
So how did the class kind of change after that? Was it just more like even keel?
Well, I mean, once you have kind of certain things established, it's hard to break those habits.
Yeah.
And so, the behaviors that were present continued to be present.
So what kind of like behaviors were the worst, and how did you end up like kind of dealing with them in that first part?
I mean, like there was like the punching holes in walls, pantsing girls in the class, like.
So do you think that there could have been, now that you're in year 20, if you had to redo that first year, how would you have approached it
Well, I would have talked to admin and told them it's a terrible idea.
Yes.
Before class.
So you would have
even
had
started.
essentially not the gall, but more essentially of the courage to kind of speak on the structure. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And so like class makeup and things like that, these are things that, veteran teachers know to kick up a fuss.
Yeah.
And good administrators, like the ones we have here, listen and are willing to work with their teachers and make changes. You get some administrators who are like,
just figure it out.
It's very rare now.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the administrators now are, I think, a lot better. But kind of, you had some in the past where like any teacher can teach anything. Your subject expertise doesn't matter. Figure it out. It's your professional obligation. And you're just like really not helpful.
Yeah.
And I find administrators now are so much more supportive.
So that's actually interesting, because one of the things from Getka, I know, just bringing back my teachers convention knowledge from the first time, but essentially it was talking about there is no pipeline for vice principals and admin. Like people no longer really want to go into administration like they used to. And this was, I don't know if this was more of an Edmonton problem because it was kind of based on the Edmonton context, but essentially people are moving into admin 4 to 5 years sooner than they used to.
Interesting.
And so they said the problem was essentially you have less class experience moving into admin, but I'm wondering if that almost kind of helps in terms of it being more helpful. Like you're not as seasoned and set when you move into admin, so you're not as willing to dismiss kind of some of the general stuff.
It's difficult.
No, you can't generalize about any sort of admin. If you generalize about admin and education, you're looking at.
I know for myself personally, I don't ever want to do administration. It's a really hard job. I have a lot of respect for administrators, even when I don't agree with them.
Yeah.
Right. Just because I would never want to be the one making those tough decisions. You got a kid coming in for a behavior issue, and like, do you bring down the hammer or do you give them a granola bar and send them back to class, right? Like, I don't want to make that decision because, who knows what the best way is, right? Maybe the soft touch is the right way. Maybe hard touch is the right way. And like, none of us have a crystal ball. We don't know.
No.
And they don't know. And they can't know.
So did you ever have any kind of admin ambition at all ever? Or no? So why not, you think? Just like that kind of in general, you don't want to be that level of responsibility and essentially being in charge. It's not the
responsibility. It's not the leadership, but it's about what I enjoy about this job, right? The part of this job I enjoy is teaching. So if I can stand in front of a classroom and tell stories, and then if I can go around while they're working on their projects and help them, I enjoy that part of the job. That is the part I enjoy. What I don't enjoy is dealing with behavior issues. I don't enjoy meetings. I don't enjoy paperwork. Oh, I just described being a principal. Right? Why would I take a job where I'm doing the worst parts of my job and no longer doing my favorite part of the job?
And I've even heard that before too, of especially I find, now I don't know if maybe this is social from my perspective, is not quite as intense as English would be. Maybe you can make, I feel like maybe you have more room for the level of intensity that you administer. So you think that's fair?
I've seen intense English teachers, and I've been intense at times as a social studies teacher. It varies. I mean, I find that you've got your math teachers seems the most serious.
Yeah. Definitely.
If I was to pick out, you walk into a staff room and where's your math teachers? It's like, okay, who are the serious ones? But that doesn't follow either. I knew a math teacher who had this wonderfully loud laugh, Renee Ainsley, and you could hear it from the other side of the convention hall if you're down at Getka, right? Her laugh was just so distinct and loud. So that just, counteracts the math stereotype I just gave.
But where I was going was essentially I find students now, I don't know if it's because I'm too chill as a person and as a teacher or whatever, but I find when students come to see me, it's not the worst part of their day. You know what I mean? So I think, but I've heard the story from someone else who is now an administrator who said to me, I used to see kids at their favorite time of the day because it was different. I won't like
Yep.
say who it was, but now moving into admin,
You're seeing
you
the
always
worst part of the
seeing
day.
the worst of the kids all the time. And she said,
Yeah.
or they said that's essentially one of the most difficult parts of just the wear and tear on
Mhm.
like your mental like
Oh,
well-being,
I
right?
believe it. I mean, that's for all helping professions, right? Like you're not seeing people at their best. So police, social workers, nurses, doctors, teachers, like, yeah.
Well, because I guess you have that idea of kind of what would you say the example was when you're envisioning the perfect teacher was
Oh
the
yeah,
is
like
it
your Dangerous Minds,
yeah.
Mr. Holland's Opus. I mean, there's a whole bunch. Freedom Writers.
Yeah,
All
like
of
you're gonna
these.
like change someone's life one
Yeah.
day and it's gonna be this magical thing, but then it becomes work. And that's kind of becomes routine where you
Mhm.
don't really kind of give it the same vigor, I guess, maybe.
Well,
But
I think for me, anyways, I can't
yeah,
speak for everyone, but for
yeah,
me, I've always tried to battle and to bring the best I can. There's certain things that I care deeply about
yeah,
and want to always give the time and importance that they need.
yeah. So what do you mean?
Well, like when you're teaching grade 12,
Yeah,
right? Like, yeah, the diploma exam is there, but I always try to get the kids to understand that it's not a good versus evil when we're talking about left wing and right wing, right? That these are two different perspectives, two different viewpoints, two different systems of values, right? And that they can be complementary, right? Not always adversarial. And we live in this polarized world now where it is very much described and put out there as good versus evil,
yeah,
right? If you're left wing, you are
yeah. Depending on your side, the other
right,
side
you
is evil.
are
Yeah,
Satan worshiping,
yeah.
you've got kids in the basement of the pizza restaurant. Like it's and then if you're on the right, you must be homophobic and hate
Yes.
immigrants
Yeah.
and I mean that's a small percentage on either side, but that's how it's
They're
sold to
defined.
us, how
Yeah.
it's defined. Yeah. And so if I can get kids to understand that, like, well, no, I mean, people on the left, and these are the terms we use to describe, right? But it's people who care about helping others, which is a good thing. That is a noble goal.
Yeah.
Right. And then on the right, it's people who want to, be independent
And pursue
and
their
work hard.
self-interest. Yeah.
And again, that's fine. That's good. Right. Those aren't bad things, either of them.
So how do you think that you've evolved as a social studies teacher? Because have you mostly taught social
Yeah.
throughout your career?
Yeah.
So like, how does so again, this is kind of where I'm going in my mind of what kind of social teacher do I want to be in 3 years, and how have you essentially like kind of changed your like I don't want to like use these buzzwords like pedagogical approach,
I know what
but
the words mean.
yeah.
So going back earlier, because like I kind of described the first stage, right? Like
Yeah.
you're using
Yeah.
the resources that have been gifted to you, and then like year 2, you start to fiddle with it.
Yeah.
You start to change and modify the things that you didn't like because you did once.
Yeah.
And so you change a few things. And that process of like revising will take, depending on the person and depending on how much time they put into it, could take 2 or 3 years or 4 years. Most teachers I knew that stuck with it by year 5, your resources are kind of yours now. Yeah, they're still probably maybe 80% what was given to you.
Yeah.
But you are now used to using them, and so they're now yours. And so that point in your career, and really like about year 5, most people hit it, is very refreshing because a lot of the stress and like
You like an
work
automaticity
is
to it
gone.
A little bit, yeah.
And so some teachers will stay there and use the material they put together and mastered in those first 5 years and use that same stuff for the next 25.
Yeah.
I don't advise doing that.
No, because I find I almost never like knowing I have the next 25 years of my life planned. I find that really,
and some teachers do, and they do a good job.
yeah.
I couldn't do it myself.
Mhm.
I would get bored with it. I still tinker. Right now I'm revising completely the grade 7 and 8 notes that I'm giving, even though I've taught those classes several times.
Yeah.
I'm doing a complete
So like, what changes have you made this year? Like any off the top of your head, or?
So I'm in my PowerPoints, I'm adding a lot more visuals.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
find that students are more engaged by looking at the image, like a map, especially.
Yes,
or
I've noticed that
political
especially for
cartoons.
like national interest and
Yeah,
like
so
the world wars and stuff.
you show them and tell them instead of just like words. I'm trying to like limit the amount of words that they see in their notes and more images, if that makes sense.
100%. Yeah, because I almost find when I would teach like the lead up to World War One and going into the end of World War One and then World War Two, well, it's like you've had the amount of border changes that you've had, and essentially from 1870 with the Italian and German unification.
So you can list them all in the notes, or
Yes.
you can put up a map.
But then I do the whole thing, and I'll show a video. I was like, this is essentially, again, getting a little bit more subject specific here, but I say this is where the arbitrary idea of nation actually becomes concrete and determines the way that you're governed. Like it's not a light subject, right? But yeah, so I guess
now
like
it's something people will, fight and die over.
Yes. And so like, are there any specific like projects for either the junior high or the high school that you essentially have as a more experienced teacher have created and love? Like what are some things that you've done?
Oh, I have a bunch of neat little things that I've done over the years that I really enjoy. And if I was to share anything with you, like subject specific stuff, it wouldn't be my notes because you have your own notes. It wouldn't be my PowerPoints because you're going to make your own. But I do have some projects that like kids have enjoyed, right? And some activities, social experiments that kids have enjoyed. And that's the type of thing that I would want to share with you.
100%, because I almost find the year one very traditional, very much, especially social. Essentially the entire time you're in university, you are lectured to. So that you're kind of, that sets up the way. You don't really know how else to deliver it. You might have a couple activities that professors did, or you might remember things that teachers did, but I almost find I'm trying to incorporate a lot more activities that aren't necessarily assignments that are for marks, but things that we'll do to try to relay the content rather than me just standing and talking and delivering it.
One of our PLF cycles was all about bringing in different types of activities and things. It was the stepping out literacy cycle, and so we worked with a lot of I was actually a instructional coach then, and so it was fun. I got to go to different teachers' classrooms, right? So I got to go to different teachers' classrooms, watch them teach, and then kind of give them suggestions. And so that was really neat because one, I saw how excellent my coworkers were. Like they were all really good. You don't get to see your coworkers in action a lot. You're in your room, they're in theirs. And the thing that I was most impressed with, I'm like, all my coworkers are really good at their job. All different. Right? Like some teachers have a relaxed, kind of casual, friendly approach, and that works for them. Others, maybe more firm, have very specific routines and things. But again, works for them. It's fine. And so that's another thing that I think by year 5, many teachers get to is kind of finding who they are.
Why year 5? Why do you think it's like,
I don't
that's
know.
the year?
It seems, and that's just like an average.
Yes,
right?
yeah. That's probably
It's
like most
I
careers,
knew some teachers like year 3, they're like already, had everything all set. I'm like, wow, you're an all-star. And then others, took a bit longer. The ones I knew that took longer though was never because of them in particular, but because they got moved from assignment to assignment to assignment, and they were never able to find that groove.
Very fair, because I almost find if you are bouncing around subjects, you're essentially, you could be in year 10. If you're then moved to teach a completely different slate of courses, you're essentially back in the same
until you get like enough of the repetition of that subject, you're not going to have the same level of comfortability and like ownership of the material. I think. I mean, I think you need at least 3 years with the subject. Even if you're a veteran teacher, switching subjects, if you didn't have at least 3 years working with that material, you'd still be a little off.
So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit here. I when I sent out the Google form that I wanted everyone to say, I wanted everyone to tell like what was the most insane, crazy story that they've sent in. You said I have a story to share, but
Oh,
I'll
I do.
save it for the big day. So if you don't mind, what was your story? I would like to hear it.
I've seen a couple other like crazier things, but like
So what are some other
not
things
so
that
much
you've heard?
funny. Oh well, they're not my stories to tell for one,
Fair enough.
and second, they're not funny. They're more like sad or disturbing.
Yes.
This one is both insane. It's my story to tell because it happened in
Yes.
my class,
Yeah.
and it's kind of funny more than
Okay.
like
Yeah.
I've sad or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a little sad, I guess. So this is my third year teaching, I think. And I'm doing notes on the whiteboard because I used to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm just writing things on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
And I'm talking while I write. And so my back's to the class while I write. But, at this point, if there's shenanigans happening behind you, you turn around and look, right? Yeah. It's not ideal, but this was before we had projectors, actually. So, of course, I was writing it on the whiteboard, the notes. It was either that or like the plastic sheets, right? On the overhead projector.
And that sound, like the buzzing of the projector being on and like
yeah. So I'm writing notes on the board and I'm telling stories about history, and I think that I'm like really on a roll. Right? Because like there's not a peep behind me. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm just feeling it,
Yeah.
cracking jokes and things. But then I turn around and look. And no one's writing. Everyone's just kind of like has these shocked expressions on their faces. So I do a quick scan of the room because I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And so I ask, and I'm going to change the name of the student in case this human exists in town.
Yes, yeah.
Right. So I'm like, so where's Timmy?
Yeah.
Silence. Okay. Everyone's still just in shock.
Yeah.
Follow-up question. Why are his pants still here? While I had been teaching, behind my back, this student who was his first year in public school, he'd been homeschooled.
Yeah.
Not that can't work out, but it didn't work out in this human's case.
Yeah.
He had a hard time adjusting. This day in particular, while I was teaching, he stood up, took off his pants, walked out of the room.
Just no context.
Well, I guess he had professed his love to another student and had been rejected. But I don't know if that's a typical response to that type of situation.
No,
right?
I wouldn't say either.
And so, yeah, like I've never had a student, strip off clothing and exit my classroom before or since.
Okay.
And the kicker, later that day, he set the whole backfield on fire.
And it all started in your classroom.
And that was the last day he went to Composite High School.
Wow. Okay. So
he went back
to
being
keep your pants
homeschooled.
on, don't set fires. I feel like that's a pretty good.
Well, and if a girl says no, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. You can always move on in other ways, healthier ways.
Right.
Yeah. So if someone were to tell you they're in high school, I want to be a teacher, what would you say?
Are you sure?
So why? Why is it not like, yes, we are changing the world day by day? Like, what is the
and we do.
thinking?
We do, and we have a real and positive impact on a lot of kids. But the job has changed, and it's changed in the last 5 or 6 years.
Okay, so how has it changed?
I've seen a big change. Teachers used to be allowed to just teach, and there was less antagonism from the community.
So how has the antagonism from the community changed?
Honestly, and I hate to be cliche, but it really started to change with the election of Trump down in the States, which is weird, right? Because that's not Canada.
Well, it was like a general shift, I think, in general.
I think some people took that as the cue that they could say the quiet parts out loud. Yeah.
So what were the quiet parts related to teaching, you think?
Well, I mean, in our town, it's not easy. It's not hard to find trucks with "Fuck Trudeau" stickers on them. Yeah. Right.
It's weird if you don't see one, but yeah, like every time you kind of go.
So, I mean, I didn't particularly agree with Stephen Harper, but I didn't put stickers on my car.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just kind of weird. And I'm not a huge fan of Trudeau myself, but just with like decals with cussing out your prime minister.
Yeah.
And like, I would think like maybe just vote in the next election.
Yeah.
But there's kind of
I need everyone to see.
Right? There's an open hostility that is new.
Yeah.
And some of that hostility is now directed at teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the trust, I think, that used to be there, that we're going to be like impartial and just, try to teach our subjects.
Yeah.
We're accused of indoctrinating students now.
Yeah.
And that's so bizarre to me, because like I can't even get them to do their homework or wear deodorant. and you think I'm indoctrinating them?
So where do you think that narrative came from? Like, why do you think it sticks so well?
It's from the United States, for sure.
Yeah.
And part of why it sticks is that everyone's been in a classroom. And most people have had teachers they didn't like.
Yeah.
And, do teachers say their opinion sometimes? Of course we do, because we're human.
Yeah.
Right. But does saying your opinion about things, or, maybe having a little bit of bias in your teaching, is that indoctrination? I mean, those are two very different things. Mm-hmm. When you look at North Korea or Nazi Germany, or places where they do real indoctrination, very different than what we have in Canada.
Yes. Yes.
People with COVID saying we're in a dictatorship. I'm like, you've clearly never learned about a real dictatorship, or have very little experience with a real dictatorship.
It's like, if you've never been on a collective farm.
Right? Like, if you think you can drive around with, Trudeau stickers and you're living a dictatorship.
Yeah. You can literally openly criticize the government.
Try, the government sticker in Tiananmen Square in China and see how that works out for you.
Yeah, it's a different situation. But so our social studies curriculum in general is obviously, as any curriculum is pretty set. But I almost find one of the things that I always thought was missing, which is like a general religion education. So like, I know there are world religions courses, etc.
They specifically chickened out of dipping too much into religion the last time they put the curriculum together. They do talk about the influence of religion as part of culture in grade 8 social studies. Mm-hmm. And that's about it.
But it's a part of like worldview, which is essentially the precursor to ideology later on down the road. But
and that's grade 8 is all about worldviews. Yes. And so you touch it on it in like identity units. So your first related issue in grades 10, 11, 12, there is room, but it's not explicitly mandated.
Yeah, because I guess there's religious understanding of nation or whatever in grade 11, yeah.
Right, but like, it's not mandated that like you're going to teach the kids what Islam is, or what Buddhism is, or what Christianity, or like what the Protestant Reformation
and not even
did.
like try to just
and
teach
these are
the history of it.
Well, right? Yeah, and these, like, just historically speaking, these are really pivotal things in why the world is the way it is.
Yeah.
And my minor was religion studies, which was my creative way to get more history classes.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, like I did poli sci. That was my other way to just get more like that kind of lane.
Tempted.
But
I was tempted.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that is an area where.
So did you ever find a way to incorporate kind of religion or religious thinking or kind of into your classes?
I did. I mean, like I talked about, I make a certain point of making sure certain things are covered. Mm-hmm. So, well, for example, grade 9 talking about with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and collective rights and individual rights, reasonable accommodations. Mm-hmm. And so I talk about like hijab and, Sikhs wearing the kirpan and other issues like that. Mm-hmm. And so a way to use those case studies to introduce more knowledge about those religions mm-hmm. in an organic and appropriate way. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
And so, same thing, like talking about identity for globalization or for nationalism, right? Like, okay, let's have an intelligent, insightful conversation about this stuff. I find talking about the things, or at least it used to be, talking about the things that are kind of controversial mm-hmm. gets the kids the most engaged.
Yes.
The unfortunate thing now is that, yes, students still get engaged, but now you're likely to get an email from a parent.
Yes, because I find I always try to frame it so with my grade 12 class, mm-hmm. So when I was in university, I did a controversial issues project where essentially we had, so my old professor was actually the chief of staff for Stephen Harper.
Oh,
He leaked secrets about a thing with like Hillary Clinton before the U.S. election and got essentially fired. But essentially, he gave us the distinction of it was my job to argue in front of 130 people against indigenous sovereignty. So essentially, the issue was you were given an issue, you had to equally prepare for both sides of the debate, and then he literally flipped a coin the day of. So then whatever side you got, you would have to present that. That's essentially like the same. I'm doing a similar type of project with my grade 12s right now, but essentially, before I go into that, I almost find that I need to kind of find a way to kind of make fun of both sides of the spectrum. So essentially, I'm trying to like make light of both. And I don't know if that's
yeah.
the right. And then by make fun, I mean essentially like I'll get into the traditional kind of conservatism stuff, but I'll always touch on like my own religious upbringing, and essentially kind of like the arbitrary things that I had to face essentially growing up, to try to guide how the thinking is, why the thinking is the way it is. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean, right at the start, what I was trying to explain, right, is that it's very helpful to get students to understand that it's not the left versus right that's the problem, but it's the extremes on either end.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if they can understand, it's like you can argue one side versus the other without going to the extremes.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to go to name calling and
Yeah.
those
The
things.
loaded
like,
language.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's not necessary. That's where politicians today go far too often, because they're trying to motivate voters to go and vote. Right? It's strategic, but I think it's also destroying our democracy. Right? That's why politicians do it, because anger gets people out to vote more than policy.
So what is kind of because I actually had this conversation today about so for this project, I have them do like a group bibliography of sources they're going to use for their project beforehand. And so in trying to find and locate legitimate media sources, what is kind of the way that you break down that process for your students?
There's a really nice graphic that talks about reliable media sources. I am forgetting the name of the human that put it together.
Yeah.
But I've seen one for U.S. news sources and one for Canadian news sources.
Yeah. Okay. So I have both of those on the graphic, essentially showing like where like the National Post would be, where CBC would be like literally on a left versus right spectrum.
And I point out to kids, right? I'm like, if you want to get a right-wing perspective, the Wall Street Journal exists, and their reporting is very professional, right? You don't have to go to like Breitbart or other places. Yeah, you don't have to go to sources that have a history of dishonesty.
So it's usually the reputation of that kind of media source.
If the media source has been found to be dishonest many times, I would tell students that's not a great source. Right? If you want a right-wing perspective, you can find reliable sources that will give you that perspective. And, that should go for left or right. Like there are left-wing sources that are not particularly reputable, that go more for name calling than, giving accurate facts. Yeah. And so sure, you may like the memes from a page like Occupy Democrats, but they have a history of stretching the truth.
Yeah. And so I guess I kind of gave them the breakdown of like the .com versus .org, like pretty general stuff to just kind of look at, are they advertising to you? What's the kind of incentive for clicks, if there is one or not? But I guess moving on kind of in that same direction of, I always open up my semesters with a reading on critical thinking. And so essentially it's like a modified document that I had from a former university professor, where we read this 20-page thing. No high school student's going to read 20 pages. So I kind of just go into it. And how would you kind of relay what critical thinking means to your students? Like, how would you teach what critical thinking is?
One of the most missing skills I find for students for critical thinking, and I had a discussion with a kid today. Too many students, and I don't know where we need to put this, but I think we do, and this is like science, social studies, and English. Too many students do not understand the difference between fact and opinion.
So
A student said today, McDonald's is the best restaurant. Fact. I'm like, that's actually an opinion. And the kid was like, no, it's a fact. I'm like, you could say McDonald's has the highest sales.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah. But you making a value judgment.
Exactly. And so that's where some of the critical thinking comes in, right? It's like, is this an opinion? Right? The value judgments that are put there, right? Is that added on? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Is there another explanation? Right? So even if we can just get students to like identify fact and opinion and the difference, would be helpful.
So yeah, I guess, well, you know what? Because I guess I've been thinking about, I probably put on my change the world hat, and I'm like, I'm gonna make them and mold them into great thinkers, but maybe I'm trying to think I'm actually going further than to, let's just decipher what a fact or an opinion is. Like maybe it should be kind of kept a little more simple.
You do some of this scaffolding, right? So like what you're doing is not wrong, but like I guarantee you there are kids in the class that are a level below.
But even a simple exercise before getting to that reading of, is this a fact or an opinion? What is this saying about, like, is this giving a positive presentation or communicating a positive element for this or not? So yeah, I think that would be
so like the bias, right? Because the opinion stuff is where you can really build into all the talk about bias, right? It's like, well, they're using these insults along with it, and these loaded terms, right? Is this an accurate depiction of this side's viewpoint if they're doing that? Probably not.
Yeah. So I have 2 more things to ask you. Okay. So now that you've been in for 20 years, essentially, if you had the entire world could listen to you for 1 minute, and what you said on education would be accepted by all and implemented, what would you say to try and change it?
Not every kid's going to like you, but I really hope every student in our schools finds some teacher that they click with, that, or it doesn't have to be a teacher, coach, parent, uncle, but like I really hope everyone has someone they know cares about them. Is that education? No, but I think that's being a good human.
So like being a positive influence in general.
Yeah. But I mean, it's going back, more properly answering your question, I guess I hope I teach my students how to ask questions, how to learn.
What do you mean by that? How to learn?
So they're going to forget things, obviously. They could forget everything we ever teach them. But if they know enough to go online and find the answers and find the correct answers, I'll feel like I did a great job teaching them.
So almost a personal sense of inquiry.
In a sense. Well, the skills, I think, right? How do you go and learn things that you don't know?
All right. That's great. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me and letting me just yap on and on and on.
I love it. This won't be the last time. Thank you, sir. Hey everyone, thank you all for tuning in. Really do appreciate it. Just wanted to say again, if there are any issues with professional conduct and or you would like to share your own story, experience, or have something you would like to contribute to the show, please do not hesitate to reach out at lucasrdclark97@gmail.com or send a direct message on Instagram to @MrClarkAfterDark. Hope you all enjoyed, potentially found something of use, and of course, please do not forget to subscribe. See you guys all next time. Unless you're scared.